Hey guys, welcome to the shop. This is really going to be our first part of a probably 3 to 5 part series on making a set of V blocks. So really the first step after squaring your material, the method I use at least, is cutting a relief groove that's going to eventually be the center of the V. Now, you need to do this because I'm going to flip the head and use an end mill. So by cutting a relief groove down the center of the part, it's really going to give me a visual center line. And at least while I'm roughing it out, it kind of doesn't matter too much if I'm off a little bit. So that's really important because there's just a lot that can go wrong in this. And the method I use is reasonably precise. Now, it's not grinding precise, but it's good enough. And that's really all we need. Now, I know I've shown this method in the past of how I hold parts in the vise. You may not have seen it because you may be new to the channel, but what we're going to do is just use a machinist's jack set to approximately the same length as the part. And now that works really well to keep the jaws from twisting this way. I just like to preset it. It does make life a little bit easier. So really the way this works is we're going to touch off on the top of the cutter. I'm going to come down 560 thousandths of an inch. Now we really got to open the jaws all the way for this. It's easy to have a brain fart when you're not used to using the machine this way. I think we're actually going to need to use lower parallels and do the cut outside of the jaws. This is really not the most ideal way to do it, but you got to work with what you've got. Yeah, you know, I really have to do this above the jaws, and I think we're going to have to forego my support parallel or my support jack, and we're going to count on this being relatively centered. So I have a potential of a 1 inch depth of cut, and I want to cut about halfway through the stock. So if my stock being roughly 1 inch wide, we're just going to have to set that way and set the machinist's jack down lower in between the parallels. So we're not directly on the jaws. I would prefer to be directly on the jaws, but we don't live in a perfect world. So I just get that finger tight, and then I'm going to clamp down, not super tight. We really have to focus, and I stick my head in here and I look close and see if we have any gaps on either side of the block, because if it's canted this way or this way, it just doesn't work as well. And really, guys, this is kind of a delicate operation. Now, we're doing this in 4140 pre-hard. So there's a lot of ways this can go sideways, for lack of a better term. Now, I know this is kind of a funny way to do it. This is just how I like to touch off with slitting saws. Is I'm just going to wiggle it basically by hand, grabbing the belt on my machine until I see it makes a scratch with the corner of the tooth. Yeah, we just touched. So I'm going to set 0 on my knee Now here's one of the tough things about the knee on this machine is I don't have a DRO. So we have to go by counting. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 560 thousandths of an inch. Now we're going to lock the knee. Now that looks, based on a sanity check, that looks centered. So that's a good sign. Now we're going to use the digital readout to set our depth of cut. And this is, I'm not going to show you the whole process of cutting this. I'm going to show you a couple of passes because it's really not going to be that exciting. Material this hard, I like to make a lot of relatively light passes so as to not tax the machine or my cutter, because slitting saws really are fairly expensive. You'll also see, I'm not really sure what it is with this arbor, but I run it in reverse because what I found is if I have the cutter flipped around the other way, I have issues with the nut loosening on it. So the die cam does make this easier. As soon as we see a white scratch like that, a little heavier touch than I wanted, but not the end of the world, we zero the digital readout. We're also not going to climb mill at all. Let me shut the machine off. We're also not going to climb mill at all on this part. I think that's asking for trouble when you're working with 4140 pre-hard. So what I'm going to do now is just really shut up and make a pass, and then I'm going to make another pass, and I'll show 3 or 4 passes. You'll get kind of an idea of what this process looks like. And I'd also like to note that chewing, that kind of intermittent noise, is because there's run out in this arbor. There's really not a lot I can do with that other than just kind of go slow, count on that, and just understand I'm only cutting on about 3 teeth. machine and do a little bit of an explanation on what's going on with this. So I'm running this on a step pulley head at 80 RPM. Really, the ideal surface speed for this cutter would be in the neighborhood of about 50 surface feet a minute. I think 80 RPM runs this at like 65 or 70. So I have to be a little bit careful and take some lighter cuts with it because, again, we're not running an ideal cutter and we're running in 4140 pre-hard. Pre-hardened 4140 is pretty tough stuff, and it's a good idea to run slow and use a lot of cutting oil. I also put oil sort of on the kerf of the blade because it's going to rub. The nod's not perfect on this machine, so the cutter's kind of going through at an angle like this, which is unfortunate, but I fight with it and I fight with it, and everything just settles that way. It's one of the issues you have, and one of the reasons that the later J-heads had a nod function on them. So what we're doing is just taking light cuts. Now, in a slitting saw like this, you're really best served. I never take more than 100,000th depth of cut. My first few cuts, I'll go progressively deeper until we hit 100 thou. But I'll start at like 20 or 30,000th depth of cut. So let's see how long I have left on my memory. We've got a few more minutes, so I'm going to take one last pass and just shut the camera down. And in our next video, I'll have flipped the head and I'll show you how we're going to cut 3 V-blocks out of this. And then we're going to slice them off to length with the slitting saw. So I think this is enough for today. It really shows enough of using a slitting saw. And I mean, for those of you who have questions on some tips on it, one of the things that's really important is understand your feed. Don't overfeed the slitting saw, and certainly don't climb mill. These saws can be really grabby because you're not cutting the same on all teeth. So what usually happens if you grab, if you're lucky, you just shear the key off. If you're unlucky, you will shatter the saw and shear the key off. If you're really unlucky, you'll shear the key, not shatter the saw, and launch your part out of the vise. And as the part's leaving the vise, then it shatters your slitting saw and you get hurt. So slitting saws are something I'm a little gun shy of taking heavy cuts on. I do know some people who would just take this whole pass in one depth straight in, and they can do it. I've not had good luck doing that. I think part of it is they have better arbors that run truer, and they're also using higher quality slitting saws. So thanks for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed. Get out in your shops and go have some fun. Or if you don't have a shop, live vicariously through someone else.